This is a PowerPoint on the old gods. Starting with Cthulhu. Cthulhu is an interesting case. It's one of the only old gods to ever receive a buff. It was buffed from 10 to 8 mana, and it was actually given Eye Stalk of Cthulhu. Of course, this didn't really do anything. Cthulhu kind of sucks. It's odd. They tried to make Cthulhu like kind of playable for Caverns of Time, and it was fine. You could play it. Was it amazing? Not really, but it was something you could do. You could play Cthulhu Warrior, you could play like Cthulhu Druid, stuff like that, where you could gain your armor and then sometimes be able to survive long enough to play this combo, but it wasn't very good in Caverns of Time. It wasn't really, it's terrible and wild, and it's just, Cthulhu never was really that good in Standard. Yes, you could play Cthulhu decks, but were they great? Not really, and there's so many things that could have been done to make Cthulhu better for Caverns of Time. They just didn't do it, and it is a bit unfortunate. The one thing that is cool about Cthulhu, though, is if you have the Cthulhu Druid Hero skin, that's just cool skin. I mean, that's not really relevant to the card, but, I mean, Cthulhu sucks, so I don't really have much more to say about it. But you have Cthulhu the Shattered, which is a good card. Cthulhu the Shattered actually saw a lot of play in Darkmoon Faire and Forge of the Barrens. It was, from my memory, not seeing that much play in United in Stormwind and Alterac Valley, but I genuinely might just be misremembering because those were so centralized around the really powerful decks. I could be forgetting that, I will admit. But Cthulhu the Shattered is just actually really cool. You could run it in your Warrior, Druid, Priest, all these different decks to have this kind of win condition. I know Druid specifically would have, Moonlit Guidance to be able to get copies of Cthulhu the Shattered and win that way, because sometimes dealing 30 damage wasn't enough, especially if they had a board. But if you actually were dealing 90 damage across 3 turns, that's pretty good. For this time period, being able to do that was actually really, really good. The way that Cthulhu the Shattered works is, start of game, it will break up and shuffle these spells in your deck. No, you can't run. I don't remember if you can't run this in odd decks, even though it in theory would work. It would be that Cthulhu the Shattered would have to trigger first, and people wanted that for forever. They would want Cthulhu the Shattered to trigger first, so that odd Warrior would have had a actual win condition, and people really wanted that at the time when this card came out. It never came to fruition. It is quite sad, but it is what it is. Your Eye of Cthulhu, 5 mana, deal 7 damage, randomly split among all enemies. Your Maw of Cthulhu, 5 mana, destroy a minion. Heart of Cthulhu, 5 mana, destroy or deal 3 damage to all minions. And then Body of Cthulhu, 5 mana, summon a 6/6 body with Taunt. These were all actually pretty good. You didn't really feel that bad playing almost any of these. Yes, Maw of Cthulhu was definitely the hardest one to play because you couldn't just play it like all the others. You actually had to have a target for it. So that was a bit rough sometimes if your opponent didn't have a minion and you didn't have minions yourself. It kind of just sat in your hand, and it was usually the one that wasn't completed the first. But they were all still quite good. Nowadays, Cthulhu the Shattered is incredibly slow. It maybe could see play at some point, and in Standard, if it were brought back, I wouldn't be too surprised, but for Wild, it's just way too slow. Then we have N'Zoth the Corruptor. This card actually saw a lot of play in its time in Standard and a little bit in Wild. You would have, decks like your Death Rattle Shaman or Warrior. You could have cards like Mountfire Armor that would be resummoned from N'Zoth or White Eyes. But the main kicker was your Q block. You would be resummoning your Void Lords, you resummon your Void Callers. You would just be able to have this as basically another Blood Reaver Gul'dan, because most of your demons had Death Rattle anyway. You could also resummon cubes, if I remember correctly. Yes, you would resummon the cube body because it actually started with a Death Rattle. It didn't gain it like some other effects, like Malknathal Lion. I've been playing a lot of Huron Hunter, so I had to make sure that actually worked. But yeah, N'Zoth is a good card. It saw play. It had its uses. It's just way too slow in today's game, but it's not really N'Zoth's fault. Blood Reaver Gul'dan is also way too slow, and they basically do the same thing. I'm not sure what you would do to N'Zoth to make it better. Of course, you would have to be like, make it a lot faster, but it kind of just, I don't think a card like this could really see play nowadays. Even in Standard, I don't think N'Zoth would see very much play without a lot of support. So there is that. N'Zoth's cool, but it's definitely not the most interesting of the old gods, in my opinion. It's probably one of the more boring ones. Then we have N'Zoth, the God of the Deep. this one was like specifically made for Paladin. I don't think any other class really was able to use it that well, and Paladin wasn't even able to use it that well because the card went from 10 to 9 mana. So that should tell you just how not well Paladin was using it. This expansion was so weird because it was so obvious that they were trying to force Paladin to play specifically around N'Zoth, God of the Deep. They gave it, Hammer the Naru, Carousel Griffin, Lothraxion the Redeemer, which is, the 5-mana 5/5 demon, that legendary that would make your hero power summon, they would have Divine Shields or Silverhand Recruits. So, it was really obvious what they were trying to force in Paladin this expansion, and it kind of didn't work very well. From what I remember, you kind of were actually more interested in the Silverhand Recruit stuff that Paladin was doing because, of Odd Paladin and stuff like that. In Wild and Standard, I think you were just still playing Librams. I think that's all you were doing. You were just still playing Librams in Standard, the entire time. So you weren't really paying that much attention to this card, is kind of the thing. Or these cards. So, that's awkward, right? When you push this entire package and then it's not very good because you're just playing something better. That's kind of what happened to the N'Zoth, God of the Deep. Again, it's not very good, so I don't really have that much to say about it, so let's move on. To an actually really good card, Yogg-Saron Rage Unbound. This card was insane. Basically, every big deck that could play it would play it. Big Priest would summon this. It was one of the best cards in Big Priest for a long time. It's really good in, there was a 28 spell or weapon-ish hunter deck that you would play, and you would summon Barnes, or you would play Barnes on 3 or 4, summon Yogg-Saron, and then it would pull the 10/10 Yogg-Saron out of your deck, the only minions you were running, and you would just hit your opponent in the face with a 10/10 that they couldn't really deal with. It was actually pretty good at the time. But the main use of Yogg-Saron, of course, wasn't Big Priest. You would get it off your Barnes, you get it off your Shadow Essence, you would use it to resummon minions from your deck. Because it would be a 1/1 off the Barnes, it would more likely die than Barnes on the same turn. So you could resurrect it, or of course you have Eternal Servitude, you could bring it back. It was really good in Big Priest for a long time. Basically only fell off when you had cards like Blood of Gahoon, which came out in Darkmoon Faire, which very ironic because, the next Yogg-Saron came out in Darkmoon Faire, just like all the other old gods. So it is quite funny. Yogg-Saron, of course, is just way too slow nowadays, but it is still, very iconic if you did play in this time period, if you did play with Big Priest or against Big Priest ever during these times. You remember the Yogg-Saron, you remember your opponent pulling it, you remember your opponent resurrecting it. It was rough to deal with, but it's not like Yogg-Saron was broken or anything. It was more just the pieces that put it together were too strong. Then we have Yogg-Saron the Defiler. This card was actually really good as well. Yogg-Saron is probably the best old god overall, I think. Both of its cards saw really good play. So you would play Yogg-Saron in 3 decks. You had Corrupt Druid, Priest, and Warlock. Priest had a legendary called Dark Inquisitor Zanesh that would it was like a 5-mana minion that Battlecry made corrupt cards cost 2 less for the rest of the game. It was fine. Corrupt Priest was okay. It's definitely not the best of the corrupt decks, which is why I'm not really talking or didn't put it on screen like these ones. But, Druid, of course, you had the Survival of the Fittest, Carnival Clown deck. That was really good. That deck, it's one of my favorite Druid decks of all time, actually. It really encapsulates what it feels like to play a ramp Druid, and, it's this really big late-game powerhouse that was incredibly worthless early game, had a big weakness to good removal, and just it was fair. It was fair, is the thing. So, comparing it to, ramp Druids of nowadays, people are really missing out. And then, of course, you had Warlock, which would make use of Ticketus. You would, get Ticketus, you would corrupt it, remove the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck. You'd get it back from Yogg-Saron the Defiler. You get a 0-mana 8/8 that also removed the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck. It's really, really, really good. It was a little toxic, I'm going to admit. People really hated playing against Ticketus. Maybe it shouldn't have been overstated, because there's no real reason for Ticketus to have been a 6-mana 8/8. You're literally never playing it just raw with the battle cry, so you're always playing it with the corrupt, so it probably shouldn't have been an 8/8, I'm not gonna lie, but it was, and it sucks to suck when you're playing your Yogg-Saron that Defiler turn, and then you just drop 10/10 and 8/8. You'll drop 0-mana 6/6s. You can play your Cascading Disaster, which is the 4-mana 4-mana spell that, you can corrupt twice to destroy 3 minions. So you would just, like, have this gigantic, disgusting swing turn that your opponent couldn't do anything about, and it was a little toxic, I'm not gonna lie. Like, that Yogg-Saron to the Defiler turn from Warlock was really gross. Then we have Yogg-Saron Hope's End. Would you believe me if I said this card was actually meta at one point? Back when Yogg-Saron first came out, it was actually good enough to be ran in a lot of decks that were spell heavy as a kind of get out of jail free card. If you were, like, in a game state that you were just losing significantly, you had no possible way to get out of, Yogg-Saron would be used as this, 10-mana bomb that could clear the board, draw you cards, deal damage to your opponent's face, create your own board, or it could deal damage to your face, discard your whole hand, things like that. And it was kind of like this really not fun to play with effect where you would just play Yogg as strictly a way to get, stop being behind on board, and then you would either win or you would lose. And, it wasn't that interesting, I'm not gonna lie. I'm very happy that it's not a thing anymore. Playing cards like Yogg-Saron Hope's End when you play Yogg-Saron Hope's End for fun, it's cool. Playing a lot of spells and just winning, or not even winning, but just knowing that you're just going to see a lot of cool effects, that's fun. But playing Yogg-Saron Hope's End as this, like, get out of jail free card is really, really, really tedious and boring. You have to sit through these long animations that don't really matter. You're just sitting there like, okay, did I win or lose the game? And it's not fun. It's not fun to play against cards like that. So I'm kind of happy that Yogg-Saron was nerfed. Of course, it was eventually reverted, years and years later, way longer than it needed to be, to then start working again even if it dies, because that's what they did. They made it so that Yogg would stop working if it died. But so now, like, nowadays in Wild, there's 8 million spells. They're all terrible, so that Yogg is funny. But, back in Standard, when you have a more consistent spell pool, Wizards of the Old Gods, really not that fun. Then you have Yogg-Saron Master of Fate. I can't for the life of me remember if this card saw any, like, relevant play. I know that, like, it's funny. It's a funny card, and people liked playing it because it's funny. But, like, I just genuinely can't remember. The one really fun part about this card, though, is that if you're playing Demon Hunter at the time, you could play Blur, and then Yogg-Saron Master of Fate. One of the options on the wheel is Rod of Roasting. I believe it was a 5% chance or something like that. And what that does is it casts Pyroblast at every target until one hero dies. That's crazy. That's insane. So what you would do is you play Blur. Your hero can't take damage this turn as a spell, and you'd rip it and pray. Was it good? Absolutely not. Was it hilarious when it did happen? Oh, buddy, it was unreal. The Wheel of Yogg-Saron is such a cool mechanic that I kind of think they should bring back at some point. They brought something similar to it in Battlegrounds, where you have, like, the buddies, and I think maybe, like, a quest or something would spin the wheel, and you would get effects from that, and of course it was different than what it is now, or what it is in Standard, or Constructed. I can't talk. But it was very cool. If you haven't checked it out, you should check out what Yogg's buddy does in Battlegrounds. Then, this is the reason that I'm cutting some of them short, because I have to spend a long time talking about this card. Yogg-Saron Unleashed. This is considered by some to be the best card ever released. I would say that that's not far off. I would say it's probably true. So, Yogg-Saron Unleashed, what is there to say? What else is there to say? This card manhandled Standard. Like, you had to run this card in every single deck in Standard no matter what, if you wanted to have any competitive play. It was 15 mana with the tag, costs 1 less for each time you play a spell this game, and it didn't have the after this use an ability cast your random spells. So, you would be able to cheat this out incredibly early in Druid, and you would win the game, because Yogg is incredibly broken. That's not where this gets interesting. Yeah, it's cool, or it's unfortunate when, like, stuff like happens that in Standard, blah, 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 who cares? We have to talk about the wild side of this, because this might be the first time ever where only one deck in the entire game was playable. Now, yeah, a lot of people might have this like, oh, but, Miracle Rogue was tier 2 at the time. Miracle Rogue was not anywhere close in power level with Lost in the Park, Yogg-Saron, Druid. So, this was back when Lost in the Park had 1 mana Rake as well. It was so utterly dominant that you were playing against Lost in the Park Druid almost every single game, if you were playing it at all. You had to run specific tech in the deck just for the mirror. That's already insane that people were doing that just for the mirror because it was so common. And then, like, there was one deck in the game that was quite decent into it, I will admit, and that was Mech Paladin. But Mech Paladin would still lose if you got your Yogg-Saron down early enough. That's the thing. It's just, it was genuinely so unreal. This is one of those you had to be there moments in the game's history that, like, it was so warping. You would, if even though the Miracle Rogue wasn't as good as Lost in the Park Druid, it was still really good. It was just like it lost to Lost in the Park Druid, so it beat everything else. It beat everything else except the best deck in the game, which usually isn't that good. It makes it like which means it's not as good as the best deck in the game. But it's just, oh my god, I can't ever talk about this enough, because this is like one of the biggest failures in Hearthstone's history, in my opinion. They left this for a full month, by the way. I do not know why they did that. I think they might have been like on a holiday or something. I can't remember, but it's one of those like, why did this happen? How did no one spot that this would happen? Because I mean, what else is there to say? It's so unbelievably like oppressive and warping to the game that it's like, how did no one at all catch this in playtesting at all? Like, it makes you wonder, what were they doing? I get that you want to make powerful new effects, right? You have this whole mini set about this whole legendary, right? But this is just like, this is like a little bit embarrassing, actually, I would say, for a card to be this disgustingly overpowered. I would feel a little bit embarrassed. I'm not gonna lie, and I don't know what more to say. It's just like, I feel bad. I feel bad if I would ever have to explain Hearthstone to like a new player at this period and explain this time period. I would feel bad. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me. I really hate Yogg-Saron Unleashed. It's so unbelievably broken. But yeah, if you enjoyed, you make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me, think down below, which is your favorite old god, which is your least favorite. I'd love to hear that, actually, because people have wildly different opinions on their favorite and least favorite old gods. And, you know, make sure to join my 2 giveaways. I have one that is for members. Of course, it's just like a Twitch subscription. You become a member to the channel. And then I have one where all you have to do is make sure to, like, comment, subscribe, and then comment down below your favorite Hearthstone card. It is for a Perils in Paradise pre-order bundle that, is coming out on July 23rd. So, enter while you can. But yeah, this is going to be it for me, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Darker than they've ever been.